Controversial plans to redevelop Barangaroo, the Sydney precinct still remembered as the Hungry Mile by some, appear set to be dragged into the courtroom as critics and proponents continue to brawl over the site's future. The Environmental Defender's Office has now joined the fray, announcing that it will help provide legal representation to opponents of the Barangaroo project. That raises the prospect of it all being locked-in courtroom dispute where it could languish for who knows how long. Meanwhile, tonight, Stateline can show you the latest computer-generated video images of the proposed project, supplied courtesy of developers Lease. They show the latest changes to the plans that are now being displayed for public comment. Critics argue we shouldn't be fooled by the glossy images and that the state government's preferred plan will result in Barangaroo becoming ridiculously overdeveloped. Nick Grimm reports.
This just-released computer animation is the latest incarnation of the development that might soon transform the shape of Sydney. Love it or hate it, there's one thing that Barangaroo South's critics and admirers do agree on. Right now, this is one of the hottest redevelopment sites anywhere on the planet.
Well, Barangaroo itself is one of the biggest projects in the world of its kind. It's arguably the biggest shoreline development in any city in the world.
This is easily the grandest, most important waterfront development in the world.
And we now have an opportunity to reinvigorate a fantastic part of Sydney Harbour, Barangaroo South.
At the moment, the piece of ground is this great sheet of concrete. It's quite hideous. Clearly needs development, clearly needs to be both public and private. Over half of the site is being made into a park.
British architect Lord Richard Rogers is the design mastermind behind Lease's controversial plans for the now disused container terminal on the western shore of Sydney's CBD. An area that used to be known as the Hungry Mile when it was a busy industrial shipping port. Lease's plans for Barangaroo first emerged 5 years ago after an international design competition for the site was conducted. Lease didn't win, but after a tender process, late last year it was selected by the state government as its preferred solution. Throughout the process, Lease's plans have been steadily evolving, gradually morphing away from the company's original proposal to become the version that has now been put on public display at the Department of Planning's Sydney office. So the plans that have gone on public display in the past week, are they Lease's final designs on this site?
They are our final designs on this site, but this is a very long-dated project, and as we move forward over a very long period of time, possibly up to some 15 years, they may actually change somewhat over that period of time.
Labour and Lend-Lease, they make quite a pair. It's time to put an end to this sordid affair. They called it the Hungry Mile.
But there's been vigorous public debate over whether Lease's vision for Barangaroo is the right solution for the site.
And the southern end is huge overdevelopment. It's got 60-storey buildings, it's got a hotel in the water, it's the building area of North Sydney crammed into an area a quarter of the size. No room between the buildings, just tomorrow's slum.
The proposed hotel to be built over Sydney Harbour is one of the most contentious elements of Lease's plans.
I cannot teach you taste.
Well, it's subjective.
Quentin, I
it's
can't
subjective.
teach you taste. If I had longer with you, maybe I could do things with you.
As chairman of the Barangaroo Design Panel, former Prime Minister Paul Keating has been a driving force behind the vision currently planned for the precinct.
What we have to do is defeat the 60s vandalism, the straight line. You know, how do you take an area which is half the size of the CBD, and that's how it is, with all of the wonderful bays and shapes of Sydney, and then there's a straight piece of concrete. What we have to do is articulate it. Headland to the north, water coming in, and then a public pier and hotel out to the water. So when you look along it, it has an articulated line which this hotel provides.
But the lines capturing most attention this week were the ones pointing straight up. While spirited debate continues over what should be done to the shape of the North Barangaroo headland, the new plans revealed Lease wants to increase the height of several of its proposed buildings in the south. The hotel over the harbour climbs to 170 metres. Neighbouring residential towers are now proposed to grow to 53 stories from the original 30 stories outlined in Lend-Lease's concept plan. Opponents say that will cause serious overshadowing of surrounding areas.
The Lend-Lease shadowing diagram starts at 9 o'clock in the morning and goes till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it doesn't show anywhere near the extent of the problem. If you do the same analysis from 7 in the morning, all of Pyrmont's in shadow. They also didn't show the effect it has on all of the rest of the cities. In the afternoon, all of the buildings behind it are in shadow. You know, it's just such a big building. It dominates everything else. The area for miles around is going to be in shadows.
But according to the CEO of Lend-Lease Australia, Rod Lever, taller buildings means less shadows.
The buildings are, as I mentioned earlier, much taller and slender, which actually provides the opportunity to reduce the amount of shadowing, and therefore the shadows move very quickly across the site.
So even though they're taller buildings, longer shadows, you're arguing that they won't cast as much shadow as shorter, squatter buildings? As shorter,
squatter buildings, which actually would create shadowing for much greater periods in the day.
But that argument hasn't convinced at least one member of the state government's Barangaroo Development Authority. Sydney Lord Mayor Clover Moore says the hotel's shadows are unacceptable and that Lend-Lease will have to move the building back onto land. But Lend-Lease says the hotel's position over the water is a non-negotiable element of its plan.
The iconic nature of the hotel out over the water is a very critical part of actually creating an international tourist destination.
So it needs to be part of any project that Lend-Lease is putting its money behind?
It does need to be part of the project, and as I said, it's actually, due to its iconic nature, is actually a critical part of making Barangaroo South a tourist destination that should bring well over 20 million visitors per annum.
Problems are growing for the developers on another front too, with the Environmental Defenders Office agreeing to represent their opponents in court. The Barangaroo Action Group says it will launch legal action the moment the state government gives approval for any work to commence on the site.
The plan is so far removed from the original concept plan, it can't be treated as a variation. They've got to go back to the beginning and start all over again.
Regardless of whether they're for or against the Lend-Lease plan, the key players all argue that it's crucial to get this project right. There's broad agreement too. Urban planning opportunities don't come any better than this.
Look, let's get down to the nub of this. Sydney would not normally have anything as good as this happen to it. Normally we muck these things up. We have all the buffhead planners in there, Treasury, planning, maritime, ports, and you know what they would have done with it? We'd have had a row of KPMG buildings from one end of it to the other. I mean, this is rescuing a victory from the jaws of defeat, basically. It will be, without a doubt, the most important waterfront development in the world, and it gives Sydney, it's going to bookend Sydney. We'll have a botanical garden to the east and a botanical garden to the west. We had no chance of getting it.
Look, I think there's a bigger question about this is such an important development. We've got to think about the next 50 years. It's not building an office building on the shoreline. It's a huge area. And we've got to think about the way New South Wales runs. So there's big issues that hopefully this will trigger a really fundamental change in what happens in New South Wales.